Rationalize the denominator. So right now we have a radical of 3/10. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to split up this radical sign to the numerator and denominator. So this is going to equal radical 3 divided by radical 10. Now I can't reduce this or simplify it any further. So as a little trick to get a radical out of the denominator of the fraction, I'm going to be multiplying by radical 10 over radical 10. Let me show you why that works. In our next step, I'll write it down below here. This is going to be equal to radical 3 times radical 10 is radical 30, and radical 10 times radical 10 is radical 100. And I say radical, in this case it's square root, so maybe better to be specific and say square root 30 over square root 100. Square root of 30 cannot be simplified, so I'm just going to leave that. And divided by the square root of 100 is 10. Okay, so this is now rationalized because the denominator is a rational number. And typically when we say rationalize, we want the denominator to be an integer, preferably a positive integer. Okay, so let me just go through this process again. We started off with our square root of a fraction, and the fraction could not be simplified. So I went ahead and split up the radical into the numerator and denominator, or the square root into numerator and denominator. And then to get this square root 10 out of the denominator, I have to multiply by square root 10 over square root 10. It's a similar process to making common denominators with different fractions. So what happens here is it creates a fraction with the square root of a perfect square, in this case square root 100, which makes 10, and that gets the radical sign out of the denominator. So when you see rationalize the denominator, this is what you do. So why do you do this? Well, this kind of goes back to the old days when slide rules were used to do decimal estimates. And these numbers that were rationalized were much easier to figure out. And it's just kind of a tradition in math that these answers are a little bit prettier, and so it's still the desired form for answers with radical numbers.